The Gallery of Shadows. The first sign of trouble came when the pigeons stopped landing on the Bowery Bridge. Barbara Gordon noticed it during her patrol, hundreds of birds wheeling overhead in agitated spirals, refusing to perch anywhere near the massive mural that had appeared overnight on the bridge's concrete supports. The artwork itself was stunning, a flowing mosaic of midnight blues and silver that seemed to shift and breathe in the lamplight, depicting what appeared to be doorways opening into star-filled voids. Oracle to Batman, she whispered into her comm as she crouched on a nearby fire escape, studying the scene through binoculars. "We've got an anomaly on the Bowery Bridge. Street art that's different." "Define different, Batgirl." Bruce's voice crackled through her earpiece, distant and focused. "The kind that makes every animal in a 3-block radius refuse to come near it." She adjusted her position, noting how even the alley cats, Gotham's most fearless scavengers, gave the bridge a wide berth. "And it wasn't here yesterday." "I'm certain." "Investigating similar reports citywide," Batman replied. 17 new murals appeared overnight. All anonymous. All unsettling. Proceed with caution. Barbara swung down to street level, her cape catching the October wind. Up close, the mural was even more disturbing. The paint seemed to have depth that defied physics, as if each brushstroke had been carved into reality itself rather than applied to concrete. Worse, she could swear she heard something, a faint humming, like distant voices singing in a language that predated human speech. "Hey, lady, you shouldn't be here." She spun to find a homeless man huddled against a dumpster 20 feet away, his eyes wild with fear. His shopping cart was packed with belongings, as if he'd been preparing to flee. "Why not?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle despite the authority of her costume. "Because of what comes out at night." He pointed a trembling finger at the mural. 3 nights ago, when it first showed up, I was sleeping right there." He indicated a spot directly beneath the artwork. "Woke up to something brushing against my face. Thought it was a rat at first, but rats don't have fingers that long, and they sure don't whisper your name." Barbara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "What did you see?" "Shadows that moved wrong. Things that looked like people but weren't quite right, too tall, joints bending the wrong way. They came out of the picture, lady. Right out of it, like walking through a doorway." He began pushing his cart away, wheels squeaking in the darkness. "And they're getting stronger each night." After he vanished into the maze of Gotham's back alleys, Barbara approached the mural more carefully. She pulled out a small scanner, one of her father's devices, modified for her work, and ran it over the paint. The readings made no sense. The surface temperature was 15 degrees colder than the surrounding concrete, and her electromagnetic sensors were picking up energy signatures that shouldn't exist in any pigment known to science. She was about to call Batman when she heard it clearly, voices speaking in harmonies that seemed to come from inside the wall itself. Not just one voice, but dozens, maybe hundreds, all weaving together in a song that made her teeth ache and her vision blur at the edges. Then she saw the hand. It emerged from the painted darkness slowly, fingers first, as if someone were pushing through thick liquid. The flesh was pale as moonlight and wrong somehow, too smooth, with joints that articulated in ways human hands shouldn't. It grasped the edge of one of the painted doorways and began to pull, as if hauling itself through from somewhere else. "Batman, I need backup. Now." Barbara's voice was steady despite the ice in her veins. "The mural is active. Something's coming through." 15 minutes out, came the reply. "Don't engage alone." But Barbara was already moving. As more hands emerged from the painted void, followed by arms and the suggestion of faces that hurt to look at directly, she fired her grappling gun at the bridge's upper structure. Whatever was happening here, she couldn't let these things loose in Gotham streets. She swung in a wide arc, coming at the emerging creatures from above. There were 3 of them now, pulling themselves through the painted doorways with movements that seemed to ignore gravity. They were human-shaped but elongated, like shadows cast by firelight, with faces that shifted between familiar and alien depending on how directly she looked at them. Her batarangs passed through the first creature as if it were made of smoke, but it turned toward her with interest that felt predatory and intelligent. When it spoke, its voice harmonized with itself, creating words that seemed to echo from multiple throats. "The guardian of the night," it said, and Barbara realized with horror that it was speaking with the voices of Gotham's missing persons, people who'd vanished over the past month, their voices stolen and woven into this creature's speech. "We have been waiting to meet you." "What are you?" she demanded, landing on the bridge's railing, ready to move in any direction. "We are what remains when art becomes prayer, when creation becomes invocation." The second creature emerged fully now, its form more solid, more real. "The artist summoned us with devotion and desperation." Each brushstroke was a word in a language older than your city, older than your species. Barbara's mind raced. Someone's doing this deliberately. The artist, who is he? She, the third creature corrected as it stepped free of the mural entirely. And she is magnificent in her madness. She paints doorways because she has lost everything that mattered to her. She calls us because she wishes to join the voices in the void. Where is she? Barbara's hand moved to her utility belt, though she wasn't sure what weapon could affect beings that seemed to exist between dimensions. "Creating," the first creature replied. "Always creating. Each new gallery brings us closer to permanent residence in your realm." The implications hit her like a physical blow. 17 murals citywide, all serving as doorways. If these things could establish permanent presence in Gotham. Oracle to all units, she broadcast on the emergency frequency. "We have a citywide supernatural threat. All personnel avoid the new street art installations. Repeat, do not approach the murals." The creatures moved then, not toward her but past her, flowing down the bridge support with liquid grace. She followed, maintaining distance, watching as they glided through Gotham's streets like living shadows. They weren't attacking anyone, yet, but their very presence seemed to drain color from the world around them, leaving a trail of gray, lifeless atmosphere in their wake. Barbara tracked them through the Bowery, across the East End, and into the Arts District where gentrification battled urban decay on every corner. They moved with purpose, leading her deeper into a maze of converted warehouses and abandoned factories until they stopped before a building that might once have been a church. Every surface was covered in murals. The artwork flowed across brick and stone like a living thing, depicting the same impossible doorways and star-filled voids she'd seen on the bridge. But these were different, older, more developed, with some doorways appearing to open into landscapes that definitely weren't Earth. Through her binoculars, she could see movement within the painted scenes, as if entire worlds existed within the brushstrokes. "She's inside," Barbara whispered into her comm, the artist. "And I think she's been at this a lot longer than 3 days." Light flickered in the building's upper windows, not electric light, but something that shifted between colors that had no names. As Barbara watched, more creatures began emerging from the various murals, dozens of them, all converging on the building like pilgrims returning to a shrine. She had to get inside. Whatever was happening in that building, it was the source of the infestation threatening to spread across Gotham. But first, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. Barbara circled the building, looking for entry points while avoiding the paths the creatures were taking. She found a fire escape on the south side, partially hidden behind a mural that seemed less active than the others. As she climbed, she could hear the humming growing stronger, not just voices now, but instruments that didn't exist in any earthly orchestra. The window she chose was unlocked, opening into what had once been the church's bell tower. Now it served as a studio space, with canvases and paint supplies scattered across the floor. But these weren't normal art supplies. The brushes seemed to be made from materials she didn't recognize, and the paints in their containers moved like living things, swirling and mixing without being stirred. "Hello, Batgirl." The voice came from behind her. Barbara spun to find a woman in her 30s, paint-stained apron over a simple dress, brush in hand. She was beautiful in the way that people who've touched something divine and terrible always are, with eyes that held too much knowledge and a smile that suggested she'd seen the end of everything. "You're the artist," Barbara said, "not a question." "I am Elena Vasquez," the woman replied. "And you are the protector of this city that destroyed everything I loved. Tell me what's happening here, Elena. Help me understand." Elena's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Understanding? Oh, child, understanding is what brought me here. 3 months ago, my daughter Maria disappeared. Vanished without a trace from her bedroom while I slept in the next room. The police found nothing. Your precious Batman found nothing. No clues, no leads, no hope." She gestured to the murals surrounding them. "But I found something else. In books that shouldn't exist, in languages that were old when your ancestors were learning to make fire. I found a way to call across the boundaries between worlds, to reach the places where lost things go. The creatures. Are my prayers made manifest?" Elena interrupted. "Each one carries a fragment of the voices I'm trying to reach. Maria's voice is in there somewhere, Barbara Gordon. Yes, I know who you are. The things from beyond see through all masks, all pretenses. She's calling to me from wherever she was taken, and I will find her." Barbara felt her blood chill. "These things aren't trying to help you find your daughter. They're using your grief to establish a foothold in our reality." "Perhaps." Elena shrugged, continuing to paint even as she spoke. "But if bringing them here is the price of hearing Maria's voice again, of finding where she's gone, then I will pay it gladly." The painting Elena was working on showed a doorway larger than all the others, opening into a space that seemed to contain entire galaxies. As Barbara watched, the paint began to glow, and she could feel reality growing thin around the edges. "Elena, listen to me," Barbara said urgently. "Whatever took your daughter, these creatures aren't going to bring her back. They're just going to destroy everything she would have wanted to come home to." For a moment, Elena's hand stilled on the brush. "How do you know? How can you be so certain?" "Because I've seen what happens when grief opens doors that should stay closed. Because I've lost people too, and I know that the things that feed on our pain never give us what we actually need." Elena turned, and Barbara saw tears mixing with paint on her cheeks. "Then what do I do? How do I live with not knowing? How do I sleep at night when she might be calling for me from somewhere I can't reach?" Before Barbara could answer, the creatures began streaming into the studio through the doorways in the murals. Dozens of them, then hundreds, all converging on the large painting Elena had been working on. The voices grew louder, more insistent, and Barbara realized with horror that among them, she could hear a child's voice, frightened, calling for her mother. "Maria!" Elena cried, rushing toward the painting. "I can hear her. She's there, she's—" "Elena, don't!" Barbara lunged forward, but it was too late. Elena plunged her hands into the wet paint of the largest doorway, and the painting opened. Reality tore like wet paper. Through the hole Elena had created, Barbara could see a landscape of impossible geometry, where purple skies housed 3 moons and the ground was covered in what looked like crystallized screams. And there, barely visible in the alien distance, was a small figure that might have been a child. But it wasn't just Maria that came through the opening. It was everything else, creatures that made the earlier manifestations look human, beings of pure hunger and malice that had been waiting for just such an opportunity. They poured through the rent in reality like water through a burst dam, bringing with them cold that burned and light that blinded. "Barbara," Elena whispered, suddenly understanding what she'd done. "Help me close it. Please." Barbara was already moving, pulling every piece of equipment she had from her utility belt. Flashbang grenades to disrupt the creature's senses, thermite charges to destroy the painted doorways, everything she could think of to sever the connection between worlds. "The paint," she shouted over the growing chaos. "We need to destroy the paint before it can dry completely. Once it sets, the doorways become permanent." Elena nodded, grabbing a container of some kind of solvent from her supplies. Together, they began systematically destroying every mural in the building, working frantically as more creatures poured through the main opening. The beings seemed to understand what was happening. They turned their attention away from the wider world and focused on stopping the two women. "Behind you!" Elena screamed. Barbara spun and fired her grappling gun at a creature that had been reaching for her with arms like twisted shadows. The line passed through it, but the electrical charge in the mechanism seemed to cause it pain, and it retreated with a sound like breaking glass. "Electricity affects them," Barbara called out. "Do you have any power tools?" Elena pointed to a corner where several electric sanders and paint sprayers were plugged in. Barbara began throwing batarangs modified with small battery packs, creating a perimeter of electrical discharge around them as they worked. The largest doorway was the most difficult to destroy. The paint seemed to fight back, reforming as quickly as they could damage it. And through the opening, Barbara could see more creatures massing, waiting for their chance to cross over. "There." Elena pointed to a small figure moving through the alien landscape. "That's Maria. That's my daughter." Barbara looked more carefully and felt her heart sink. The figure was child-sized, but its proportions were wrong, too tall, limbs too long. And when it turned toward them, its face was a shifting amalgamation of every missing child in Gotham, their features blending and separating like smoke. "Elena," Barbara said gently, "that's not your daughter. That's what they want you to think, but it's not her." Elena's face crumpled. "Then where is she? Where is my Maria?" "I don't know," Barbara admitted. "But I promise you, we'll find her. The right way. Through investigation, through evidence, through hope instead of desperation." Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. Together, they managed to apply enough solvent to the largest painting to begin dissolving the connection. The rent in reality started to close, and the creatures began retreating, flowing back through the dimensional doorway like a tide pulling back from shore. As the last of them disappeared and the painting finally dissolved into meaningless smears of color, Elena collapsed to her knees in the ruins of her studio. "I've lost her forever now," she whispered. "I had a chance, and I—" "You had grief," Barbara corrected, kneeling beside her. "And grief makes us do desperate things. But Elena, look at me. Your daughter went missing 3 months ago. That means she's still out there, in our world, where we can actually find her. Where we can bring her home." Elena looked up with eyes that held the first spark of real hope Barbara had seen in them. "You really think?" "I think we have work to do," Barbara said firmly. "The right kind of work. Will you help me?" As dawn broke over Gotham, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that belonged to the real world, Elena Vasquez began to clean the last of the otherworldly paint from her brushes. There were still 17 murals scattered across the city that would need to be dealt with, still creatures that might try to return, still a little girl who needed to be found. But for the first time in months, Elena was painting with colors that came from tubes instead of nightmares. And somewhere in the growing light of morning, Barbara Gordon was already planning how to find one missing child in a city of 8 million people. It would be difficult. It would take time. But it would be real in a way that interdimensional rescues could never be. And in Gotham City, real hope was always worth more than magical solutions. The pigeons returned to the Bowery Bridge that afternoon, landing fearlessly on concrete that no longer hummed with otherworldly voices. Sometimes, Barbara thought as she watched them from her apartment window, the most important victories were the ones that let ordinary life resume. Maria Vasquez was still out there. But now, at least, they were looking for her in the right dimension.